At the New Year's party, Dad said, "This year, don't bother." But I showed up anyway. And when he started dismissing my dreams, I said, "I'm moving to Seattle, the city you always talked about, but never had the courage to try." 6 months. Later, I sent them a postcard from the Space Needle, saying, "Dreams don't wait for permission." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Olivia. I'm 32 years old. And last December, at my parents' annual New Year's Eve celebration, my father told me not to attend because my lack of direction would embarrass him in front of his colleagues. Before I tell you how I transformed that rejection into the greatest adventure of my life, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I always appreciate knowing who's on this journey with me. It was a chilly afternoon on December 30th, the kind of winter day where the sky hangs low and heavy. It's promising snow but never quite delivering. I was in my apartment, carefully wrapping a gift of vintage Seattle travel poster from the 1960s that I'd found at an estate sale. My parents, especially my dad, had always talked about Seattle as this mythical place where they'd make it big someday, where Dad would open his architecture firm with a view of Puget Sound, and Mom would teach at a prestigious university. Seattle was the dream they'd abandoned when reality and routine took over. When I was born, when the mortgage payments started, when the safe career path seemed wiser than the risky one, the poster was beautiful, showing the Space Needle against a watercolor sunset, the city skyline looking optimistic and full of promise. I thought it would be the perfect gift to remind them of that spark they once had. Maybe even rekindle something in them as they entered another year. I had just placed the final piece of tape on the wrapping paper when my phone buzzed. Mom's name flashed on the screen. "Olivia, honey, I'm just calling about tomorrow night," she began, her voice carrying that familiar note of tension she always had when Dad had put her up to something uncomfortable. "I've got your gift already," I said cheerfully, running my finger along the edge of the wrapped poster. "I found that sparkling cider you like, non-alcoholic, so I can drive home after." There was a pause on the other end of the line, the kind of heavy silence that weighs more than words. "About that," Mom said carefully, "your father thinks, well, this year is special. He's invited some important people from his firm. New partners and their wives." I waited, already feeling my stomach tighten. I knew where this was heading. "He thinks it would be better if you didn't come this year." The words hung in the air between us, even through the phone line. I gripped the edge of my kitchen counter, feeling the cool surface under my fingers. "He doesn't want me there," I said. It wasn't a question. "It's not that, honey, it's just—" Her voice trailed off, searching for the right excuse. "He's under a lot of pressure with these new partners. They're all so established, with children in prestigious schools and impressive careers. He doesn't want to have to explain." "Explain what, Mom?" "Explain me." Another pause. "You know how your father is about appearances? And with you between jobs again, and that whole situation with Ryan ending so abruptly?" I closed my eyes, feeling heat rise to my face. 3 months ago, I'd left a soul-crushing corporate job in marketing. 2 months ago, my 3-year relationship had imploded when Ryan accepted a position overseas without even discussing it with me. According to my father's scorekeeping, I was failing on all fronts that mattered. "So I'm an embarrassment," said flatly. "No, that's not what I meant," Mom backpedaled, but her denial lacked conviction. "It's just timing. Maybe you could come by earlier in the day instead. Drop off your gift, have a quick lunch with just us." I looked at the carefully wrapped poster on my counter. The dream they'd abandoned, packaged up in festive paper. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Put Dad on the phone," I said quietly. "He's in his study. He's very busy with the quarterly reports," and Mom put Dad on the phone. I heard her sigh, then muffled footsteps as she walked through their house, the same house I'd grown up in, with its meticulously maintained lawn and the perfectly arranged family photos that told a story of success and harmony that existed mainly for visitors. After what felt like an eternity, I heard my father's voice, crisp, professional, always the executive, even at home. Olivia, your mother says you're upset about the party arrangements. No greeting, no warmth, just straight to the issue at hand like I was an agenda item at one of his board meetings. Is it true? You don't want me at your New Year's party? It's not about what I want, he replied, his tone measured. It's about what's appropriate. These are important connections for the firm, people who could determine my partnership track. And I'm inappropriate? I pressed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story, he sighed, the sound of a man dealing with an unreasonable request. Olivia, you're 32 years old. You've quit yet another job without having a new one lined up. Your boyfriend, the one stable thing you had going, is gone. You're living in that tiny apartment with no real plan. What exactly am I supposed to tell the Hendersons when they ask what my daughter is doing with her life? Each word landed like a precision strike. I'd heard variations of this speech my entire adult life, but somehow this time it hit differently. Maybe because I was already raw from the past few months. Maybe because I was tired of measuring my worth by his metrics. I could tell. I'm figuring things out, I suggested, trying to keep my voice steady. You could tell them I'm exploring my options. You could tell them I'm your daughter and you're proud of me anyway. He made a dismissive sound. This isn't about pride, Olivia. This is about reality, about consequences, about the impression we make. This year it's better if you don't attend. That's final. There it was. The executive decision. The case closed. What about Mom? I asked. Does she agree with you? Another pause. Your mother understands the importance of these professional relationships. Translation. He'd steamrolled her opinion as usual. I see, I said quietly. Well, don't worry about me embarrassing you, Dad. I won't be there. Good, he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. That's mature of you, Olivia. We'll set up a lunch soon, just the three of us. After the new year starts, sure, I replied, though something was shifting inside me. Something fundamental. Happy New Year, Dad. I hung up before he could respond. For a long moment, I just stood in my kitchen, staring at the wrapped poster on the counter. The Seattle dream, their abandoned future. The thing about being told you're a disappointment enough times is that eventually you start to believe it. You internalize it. You make decisions. You avoid making them based on this core belief that whatever you choose will ultimately be wrong. That's been my pattern. For years. Safe choices. Half measures. Always with one eye on my father's approval meter, which never seemed to tick above tolerating. But something snapped inside me that afternoon. Not in a breaking way, but in a realigning way. Like puzzle pieces. Shifting to reveal a completely different picture. I picked up the wrapped poster and carefully tore off the paper. The vibrant image of Seattle stared back at me. The city they'd dreamed of but never dared pursue. I took out my laptop and opened a new browser tab. Without hesitation, I typed jobs in Seattle. 4 hours later, I had submitted my resume to 7 different marketing positions in the Seattle area. I'd researched apartments, cost of living, and transportation options. I'd even looked into a short-term rental that could get me started. While I found my footing, it wasn't a plan fueled by spite. At least, not entirely. It was more like suddenly seeing a door that had been there all along, but that I'd been conditioned to ignore. A path that led somewhere other than the narrow road of my father's expectations. The next day was New Year's Eve. While my parents were preparing for their important party with their important guests, I was making lists, sending emails, and mapping out a future that for the first time in years excited me. Around 8 p.m., just as my parents' party would be getting into full swing, I found myself driving, not toward their house in the suburbs, but in the opposite direction. I ended up at Milestone Park, a small green space on the edge of town with a hill that offered a view of the city lights. I parked and hiked up to the summit, my breath creating clouds in the cold night air. At the top, I could see the glittering grid of the city spread out before me. Somewhere in that constellation of lights, my parents were hosting their carefully curated gathering, relieved that their directionless daughter wasn't there to complicate the narrative. I pulled out my phone and saw 3 missed calls from my Mother probably checking to make sure I wasn't going to show up and create a scene. I sent her a brief text. Don't worry. I'm not coming. Happy New Year. And I silenced my phone and put it away. As midnight approached, I watched distant fireworks begin to bloom in the sky. Pops of color against the darkness, brief and beautiful. I thought about all the New Years I'd spent trying to fit myself into the story my father had written for me. All the compromises and concessions. All the times I dimmed my own light to avoid outshining his carefully constructed image. When the clock struck midnight and the major fireworks displays erupted across the city, I made myself a promise. This would be the year I stopped waiting for permission to live. This would be the year I pursued a dream even if it wasn't originally mine. Maybe especially because it wasn't mine. In that moment, standing alone on a hilltop while the world celebrated a fresh start, I felt more clarity than I had in years. I wasn't just running away from my father's disappointment. I was running towards something else entirely, the possibility of discovering who I could be outside the shadow of his expectations. The next morning, January 1st, I woke up with purpose thrumming through my veins. First thing, I called my landlord to discuss breaking my lease. To my surprise, he was understanding. Someone on the waiting list could take over immediately, meaning I could leave without penalty. It felt like the universe was conspiring to push me forward. The first sign that maybe, just maybe, this impulsive. The decision was the right one. I didn't hear from my father that day. My mother called once, her voicemail a mixture of apology and concern. Your father didn't mean it quite the way it sounded, she said. Her voice carrying that familiar note of someone who's spent decades making excuses for difficult behavior. Me. Call me back when you can, honey. I didn't call back. Not yet. I needed to maintain this bubble of determination, this newfound clarity, before their doubts could seep in and erode my resolve. Instead, I made more plans. I scheduled video interviews with 2 companies in Seattle. I researched neighborhoods and transit routes. I joined online groups for newcomers to the city. With each step, what had started as an emotional reaction was solidifying into a tangible plan. 3 days later, I received an email that changed everything. One of the marketing firms in Seattle wanted to do a final interview in person. It would cover my flight and hotel for a 2-day visit the following week. It was happening, really. Happening that evening, I finally called my mother back. Her relief was palpable. Olivia, I've been so worried. Your father and I have news, Mom, I interrupted, not wanting to get pulled into the familiar dance of her making excuses for him. I have a job interview in Seattle. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought we might have been disconnected. Seattle? She finally whispered, the word laden with history. Yes. For a marketing position with a firm there. They're flying me out next week, but that's so far away. Her voice had gone small. Is this because of what happened at New Year's? Because your father was just stressed about work, and it's not about Dad, I said. No, we both knew that wasn't entirely true. It's about me finally doing something decisive, something bold, by moving across the country. Olivia, that's not bold. That's reckless. I thought about how to explain it to her. How to make her understand that this wasn't just rebellion. It was reclamation. Remember how you and Dad used to talk about Seattle? How it was going to be this fresh start, this place where you'd build something amazing? Another silence. That was a long time ago, she finally said. Before responsibilities. Before reality. Well, I don't have those same responsibilities, I pointed out. No mortgage, no kids, no partner. Dad made that very clear on New Year's Eve. So maybe I can do what you and he couldn't. This isn't about our old dreams, Olivia. This is about your future, your stability. Maybe your dream is exactly what my future needs, I countered. Maybe I need to see what's possible when you don't let fear make your decisions. The words hung between us, sharper than I'd intended. My mother had always been the peacekeeper, the one who surrendered her desires first. I wasn't just challenging my father's authority. I was questioning the compromises that had shaped our family dynamic for decades. I should go, I said into the strained silence. Let's let you know how the interview goes. Olivia, wait, but I had already hung up, my heart pounding. For the first time in our relationship, I wasn't seeking her approval or reassurance. I was simply informing her of a decision already made. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. I researched the company extensively, practiced my interview responses, and carefully selected my most professional outfit. By the time I boarded the plane to Seattle, I felt equal parts terrified and exhilarated. Seattle greeted me with exactly the weather it was famous for, a soft, misty rain that seemed to blur the edges of everything. But even through the gray, the city pulsed with an energy I could feel immediately. As the taxi carried me from the airport to my hotel downtown, I pressed my face to the window like a child, taking in the glimpses of Puget Sound. The distinctive skyline with the Space Needle, the lush greenery that seemed to reclaim every untended space. It was exactly as the poster had promised. And nothing like the Midwestern suburb where I'd spent my entire life. The interview the next day went surprisingly well. The firm was smaller than my previous company, specializing in campaigns for local businesses and startups. The creative director Elaine had a shock of silver hair and an infectious enthusiasm that made me feel immediately at ease. "What brings you to Seattle?" she asked toward the end of our conversation. "It's a big move from the Midwest." I hesitated, unsure how much personal information to share in a professional setting. But something about Elaine's direct gaze encouraged. "Honesty. It's always been a dream," I said simply. "It's not originally mine, but I've adopted it. Sometimes we need to pursue the paths others were afraid to take." Elaine studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Well, I hope this particular path works out for you. We'll be in touch very soon." The second day of my trip was free for exploration. Despite the continued drizzle, I wandered the neighborhoods. From the historic charm of Pioneer Square to the eclectic energy of Capitol Hill, I visited Pike Place Market and watched the famous fish throwers. I stood at the edge of Puget Sound and breathed in the salty air. With each new discovery, I felt more certain. This unfamiliar city, this place that had only existed in family mythology, was speaking to me. Not because it was perfect or because it guaranteed success, but because it represented possibility. The kind of possibility my parents had once imagined for themselves before settling for security instead. As I sat in a small coffee shop on my last afternoon, warming my hands around a mug of something rich and fragrant, my phone rang. It was the Seattle area code. Olivia Elaine's voice came through. "How quickly can you start?" Just like that, fantasy crystallized into reality. I had a job offer. It's a good one, with a salary that would allow me to live comfortably in this new city. All I had to do was say yes. "I can be ready in 2 weeks," I heard myself say, the decision made somewhere beyond conscious thought. "Excellent." Elaine sounded genuinely pleased. "We'll email the formal offer later today. We'll come to the team and to Seattle." Sat in that coffee shop long after the call ended, watching raindrops race down the window and feeling a strange sense of peace settle over me. I had done it. I had taken the first irreversible step toward a completely different life. That evening, as I packed for my return flight, I realized I needed to tell my parents. Not ask their opinion or seek their blessing, those days were behind me now, but inform them of my decision. I owed them that much. I called my mother's cell phone, hoping to catch her alone. No such luck. She put me on speaker, and I could hear my father's breathing in the background. "I got the job," I said without preamble. "I'm moving to Seattle in 2 weeks." The silence that followed was deafening. "You can't be serious," my father finally said, his voice tight with disbelief. "This is absurd, even for you, Olivia, throwing away everything here on some whim." "It's not a whim," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "It's an opportunity. A good one. The kind you always told me to look for." "In Seattle," he countered, 3,000 miles away. "That's not an opportunity. That's running away." I thought about pointing out the irony that Seattle had once represented opportunity to him too, but some battles weren't worth fighting anymore. "I'm not running away," I said instead. "I'm running towards something. There's a difference." "This is because of the New Year's party, isn't it?" he pressed. We're punishing us because I asked for one evening to focus on my career without having to explain your situation. The accusations stung, but not as much as it once would have. This isn't about you, Dad. Not everything is. Olivia, my mother, cut in, her voice trembling slightly. Please think about this. It's so far. We'll hardly see you. That gave me pause. It's not because it changed my mind, but because I realized that in my eagerness to escape my father's disapproval, I hadn't fully considered how this would affect my relationship with my mother. Complicated as it was, we had always been close in our own way. We can visit, I said, softening my tone. Both ways. And there's video calls. It's not like I'm disappearing. This is ridiculous, my father muttered in the background. God, she's not thinking clearly. And this falls apart, and will she expect us to bail her out again? That familiar heat rose to my face. The again was a particularly unfair jab. I had asked for their help exactly once when I was 24, and my car had broken. Down beyond repair, it helped with the down payment on a new one, which I had paid back in full with interest within a year. I won't need bailing out. I have savings. I have a solid job offer. I have a plan. A plan, he repeated, the word dripping with skepticism. 2 weeks ago, you had no direction whatsoever, and now suddenly you have a comprehensive plan to uproot your entire life. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, my father had criticized my lack of direction, my inability to commit to a clear path forward, now that I had finally found one. He couldn't accept it because it wasn't on his terms. In his city under his watchful eye, yes, Dad, I have a plan. Maybe it came together quickly, but that doesn't make it any less real. My mother sighed, that familiar sound of someone caught in the middle. Olivia, honey, we just want what's best for you. I know, Mom, and for the first time in a long time, I think I know what that is too. This conversation is pointless. I could picture him perfectly standing in their kitchen. One hand gripping the counter, jaw set in that way it got when he'd made up his mind. When you come to your senses, we'll talk again. The line went dead before I could respond. He'd hung up on me. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, phone still in hand, feeling a strange mixture of hurt and liberation. The hurt was familiar, the sting of his disapproval, the weight of failing to meet his expectations, but the liberation was new. For the first time, his judgment didn't feel like the final word on my worth. 2 weeks later, I stood in my empty apartment, surrounded by boxes labeled for shipping and a few suitcases I'd take on the plane. Most of my furniture had been sold or donated. What remained were the essentials and the meaningful clothes, books, photographs, and a few cherished keepsakes, including the Seattle poster, which I'd carefully rolled and placed in a protective tube. It was coming with me, a reminder of how dreams can hibernate, but never truly die. My mother had called several times, her messages growing increasingly. Worried as my departure date approached, my father remained silent. I wasn't surprised. His preferred method of expressing disapproval had always been withdrawal, as if by withholding his presence he could force compliance. It had worked for most of my life, not this time. The night before my flight, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I opened it, my mother stood there, looking smaller somehow, her face tight with unspoken emotions. Mom, I wasn't expecting you. I couldn't let you leave without saying goodbye properly. I brought you something. I stepped aside to let her in, watching as she took in the empty apartment. The stacked boxes, the undeniable evidence that this was really happening. It's strange seeing it like this. I remember helping you move in 4 years ago. Your father insisted on rearranging the furniture 3 times to maximize the flow. I smiled at the memory despite myself. Where's Dad tonight? Her expression clouded. Working late, or at least that's what he said. She set the gift bag on the counter. He's struggling with this, Olivia. More than he lets on. Hey, he has a funny way of showing it, your father, she began, then paused, choosing her words carefully. He's always believed that his way of doing things was the only right way, the safe way. When you choose differently, he takes it as a rejection of everything he stands for. I wanted to argue that his inflexibility wasn't my problem to solve, but something in her expression stopped me. There was a wistfulness there, a shadow of old. Regrets? Is that what the Seattle dream was about? Did he see it as the risky path? She looked surprised that I'd made the connection. It was different then. We were young, just starting out. Seattle represented this whole other life we could have had. Your father had been offered a position with a progressive firm, they're smaller, but doing innovative work he was passionate about. So what happened? She sighed, leaning against the counter. What always happens. The safe choice came along. A bigger firm here, more traditional, but established. Better benefits, clearer path to partnership. And then I got pregnant with you. And suddenly security seemed more important than adventure. I felt a pang of something complicated guilt mixed with curiosity. Do you regret it? Staying here? My mother looked at me directly, her eyes clear and honest. I regret that we let fear make our biggest decisions. I regret that somewhere along the way, your father forgot there were other valid ways to live. She reached for my hand. I never, not for 1 second, regretted you. The simple sincerity in her voice brought unexpected tears to my eyes. For years, I'd internalized the idea that my existence had somehow derailed their grander plans. To hear her refute that so clearly was a gift I hadn't known I needed. Open your present. Inside was a small wooden box, intricately carved with a pattern of waves and mountains. It looked old, possibly handmade. I lifted the lid to find a delicate silver compass, tarnished with age but still beautiful. It was my grandfather's. Gave it to me when I left for college, the first in our family to go. He said even when we think we're lost, we never truly are. We always have an internal compass pointing us toward our true north. I ran my finger over the face of the compass, feeling the slight tremor of the needle as it oriented itself. I've kept it all these years. Sometimes, especially when your father and I were first married and making those big life decisions, I'd hold it and wonder if we were following our true direction or just the path of least resistance. The weight of her confession hung in the air between us. In all our years together, my mother had never spoken so candidly about her own doubts, her own unfulfilled yearnings. Thank you. Keep it with me always. She nodded, blinking back tears. Just promise me something. Don't go to Seattle to spite your father. Go because it's truly where your compass is pointing you. I considered her words carefully. Was I making this move for the right reasons? Was I following my own true north or just rebelling against my father's rigid expectations? I think it is. Maybe it started as a reaction, but the more steps I take toward this new life, the more right it feels. Like I'm finally moving in a direction that's authentically mine. She studied my face, then nodded slowly. That's all I needed to hear. She straightened up, visibly gathering herself. Now, what can I help you with tonight? Any last-minute packing? We spent the next 2 hours going through my remaining tasks, my mother bringing her organizational skills to bear on my somewhat chaotic packing system. We didn't talk more about my father, or about regrets, or even about Seattle. We just worked. Side by side, mother and daughter, preparing for a transition we both knew would change our relationship forever. When it was time for her to leave, she held me tightly longer than usual. Call me when you land, and then call me whenever you need to, day or night. I will, Mom. Thank you for coming tonight. She pulled back, framing my face with her hands. The way she used to when I was small. Be brave, Olivia. Braver than we were. After she left, I sat alone in my nearly empty apartment, turning the compass box over in my hands. My mother's words echoed in my mind. Don't go to Seattle to spite your father. Go because it's truly where your compass is pointing you. Was it? I had to be honest with myself. This journey had begun as an emotional reaction to my father's rejection, but somewhere along the way it had transformed into something else, a genuine calling toward a new beginning. A path that felt right not because it would upset my father, but because it resonated with something deep inside me. I opened the box and watched the compass needle swing gently before settling on north. Maybe that's how life worked. Sometimes the initial push came from pain or anger or rebellion. But if you were lucky, those difficult emotions could set you on a course toward something authentic and true. The next morning, I boarded a plane with 2 suitcases and a carry-on bag, containing my most precious possessions, including the compass and the Seattle poster. As the aircraft lifted off, I watched my hometown shrink beneath me, the familiar grid of streets and highways, the river winding through the center, receding until they disappeared beneath a layer of clouds. I wasn't running away. I was flying toward. Seattle welcomed me with unseasonably clear skies and a spectacular view of Mount Rainier as the plane made its final approach. It felt like an omen, a blessing on this new chapter. My first weeks in the city passed in a whirlwind of adjustments and discoveries. The temporary apartment I'd secured turned out to be in Capitol Hill. It's a vibrant neighborhood full of eclectic shops, diverse restaurants, and a palpable creative energy. My job at the marketing firm was challenging in the best way, pushing me to stretch my skills while valuing my unique perspective as someone new to the city, the Pacific Northwest. I called my mother every few days, sending her photos of my explorations, the view from Cary Park, the colorful stalls of Pike Place Market, the ferry crossing to Bainbridge Island. Responded with enthusiastic messages and questions, genuine interest in my new world. My father remained silent. I knew from my mother that he was aware of my move, my new job, my new address. She had given him all the information, but no call came, no email, not even a terse text message acknowledging this massive change in my life. His silence hurt, but it no longer defined me. Each day in Seattle brought new connections, new challenges, new opportunities to discover who I was outside the narrow confines of his expectations. I made friends at work, joined a hiking group that explored the nearby mountains on weekends, and even started taking a ceramics class at a community center something I'd always wanted to try, but had dismissed as impractical. 1 month into my Seattle adventure, I finally hung the vintage poster in my apartment. I'd had it professionally framed, a small extravagance that felt symbolic of how I was choosing to value this journey. As I positioned it on the wall of my small living room, I realized with a start that I was now living inside that dream. The mythical city that had represented possibility for my parents was now my actual home. That evening I took the wooden box containing my grandfather's compass and placed it on the shelf directly beneath the poster. Past and present, inherited dreams and new realities, all in conversation with each other. I snapped a photo of this arrangement, and after a moment's hesitation, sent it to both my parents' numbers. No caption, no explanation. Just the image, the poster above, the compass below. My mother responded almost immediately with a heart emoji in the message. "It looks perfect there. He's coming around, slowly. Give him time." No response from my father. I hadn't expected one. 3 months into my Seattle life, the unexpected happened. I was at work in the middle of a brainstorming session for a new client when my phone buzzed with a call from my mother. She never called during work hours unless it was important, so I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. "Mom, is everything okay?" Her voice came through shaky, but clear. "Your father's had a heart attack." Olivia. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. For all his faults, for all our conflicts, he was still my father. Still the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had quizzed me on math facts before tests, who had, in his own rigid way, wanted me to succeed. "How bad is it?" I managed to ask, my throat tight with sudden fear. "They're calling it moderate. He's stable now. They put in a stent." She took a shuddering breath. "He's going to be okay." But it was scary, Olivia. Really scary. "I'm coming home," I said, without hesitation. "I'll book the first flight I can get. Are you?" "Sure." "He wouldn't want you to disrupt your work, your new life, Mom," I interrupted gently. "I'm coming. Text me the hospital details. I'll let you know when I'll arrive." That evening, I was on a plane heading east, watching the sun set behind me as if rewinding the journey I'd made 3 months earlier. My emotions were a tangled mess: concern for my father's health, anxiety about our inevitable confrontation, uncertainty about what this crisis might mean for our fractured relationship. The hospital was quiet when I arrived, visiting hours technically over, but the night nurse at the cardiac care unit took one look at my travel-worn appearance and made an exception. "He's awake," she said kindly. 10 minutes? Okay. He needs his rest." I nodded gratefully and followed her directions to room 412. The door was partially open, and through the gap I could see my father lying in the hospital bed, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. His always perfect hair was mussed, his face pale beneath its usual tan. A monitor beside the bed beeped steadily, tracking the rhythm of his heart. I knocked softly on the doorframe, turned his head, and for a brief moment, before he could compose his features into their usual mask of judgment, I saw a naked surprise and, was it possible, flash of pleasure at the sight of me. "Olivia," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "What are you doing here?" I stepped into the room, setting my small overnight bag on the floor. "Mom called." I came as soon as I heard. Frowned slightly, but it lacked his usual force. "Shouldn't have disrupted your work. I'm fine. Just a minor setback." "Heart attack isn't minor, Dad," I said, moving to stand beside his bed. "And some things are more important than work." Something flickered across his face recognition, perhaps of how often he had prioritized differently. "Your mother worries." "Too much," he said, but the words held no real conviction. "She shouldn't have bothered you with this." "It's not a bother to be here for my father when he's ill," I replied simply. An uncomfortable silence fell between us. 3 months of no contact, of his deliberate absence from my new life, hung in the air like an uninvited guest. Finally, he sighed, a small sound that seemed to deflate him further. "How is Seattle?" He spoke the name of the city as if it were a foreign country, distant and slightly suspect. "It's good," I said, deciding to keep it simple. "The job is challenging. The city is beautiful. I'm finding my way." He nodded slightly, his gaze shifting to the window where the lights of the hospital parking lot glowed in the darkness. "Mother shows me the pictures you send. The mountains. The water." A pause. "It looks like the poster." The mention of the poster, that tangible link between his abandoned dreams and my new reality, surprised me. "Yes," I agreed softly. "It does." Another silence stretched between us, but this one felt different, less hostile, more contemplative. "The doctors say I need to make changes," he said finally, still not looking at me. "Diet, exercise, stress, management." He nearly spat the last 2 words, as if they were affronts to his dignity. Apparently, working 14-hour days and surviving on coffee and adrenaline isn't sustainable after 60. Despite everything, I felt a surge of empathy for him. My father had always defined himself by his work, his productivity, his ability to outperform everyone's expectations. Being forced to acknowledge his physical limitations must be terrifying for him. "Change is hard," I said, thinking of my own journey these past months, "but sometimes it's necessary.
Oh.
Sometimes it's even good." He finally turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. "Is that what Seattle has been for you? A good change?" The question seemed to carry more weight than its simple words suggested. It wasn't just about my new city or my new job. It was about the fundamental shift in our relationship, about my decision to step outside the life he had envisioned for me. "Yes," I answered honestly. "It has been. It's not always easy, but good." "Right." He absorbed this, his fingers plucking absently at the thin hospital blanket. "Your mother says you've joined a hiking group. You're taking some kind of art class." The fact that he knew these details, that he had been listening to my mother's reports about my life, even while maintaining his silence, it touched something deep inside me. "Ceramics," I confirmed. "I'm terrible at it so far, but I enjoy it." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You were always creative, even as a child. Those elaborate stories you used to tell, the drawings you covered the refrigerator with." He shook his head slightly. I never understood where that came from." "Maybe from you," I suggested quietly. "Your architectural designs. Those weren't just technical, they were beautiful, creative." He looked genuinely startled by this observation. "That was different. That was work. Doesn't have to be separate, Dad. Creativity and practicality, dreams and reality. Sometimes they can coexist." The monitor beside his bed beeped. Reminder of how precarious the balance of life could be, how quickly priorities could shift when confronted with mortality. "I should let you rest," I said, noticing the fatigue beginning to show in the lines around his eyes. "I'll be here for a few days. We can talk more tomorrow." He nodded, but as I turned to leave, he spoke again. "Olivia." His voice had a different quality to it, hesitant, almost vulnerable. "Thank you for coming." 3 simple words, but from my father, they felt monumental. An acknowledgement, however small, that my presence mattered, that I mattered. "Of course, Dad," I said softly. "Get some sleep." As I left the hospital that night, walking through the same corridors where I had been born 32 years earlier, I felt something shift inside me. I'd come back, yes, but not as the same person who had left 3 months ago. It's not as the daughter desperately seeking approval. It's willing to contort herself to fit into the narrow space her father's expectations had allowed. I had returned as myself, still his daughter, still connected by blood and history and complicated love, but also irrevocably changed by the journey I had undertaken, by the courage it had taken to follow my own compass, even when it pointed away from the safe harbor of his approval. And maybe, just maybe, my father was beginning to see me differently too, not as a disappointment or an extension of himself, but as an individual charting her own course. The heart attack had forced him to confront his own mortality, his own limitations. Perhaps it had also cracked open a window of possibility for our relationship not to become what it never was, but to evolve into something new, something honest, something real. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I looked up at the stars, the same stars that shone over Seattle, over every path not taken, and every brave new beginning. The universe was vast, full of infinite possibilities. And for the first time, I felt truly at home in its endless expanse, belonging not to one fixed point or predetermined path, but to the journey itself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.